Jadeja is bowling, Bosch is batting, and Rishabh Pant is flailing around like a fish out of water trying to stop a ball. This is a delivery towards the end of day 2 of this test match, where the ball has been delivered by Jadeja, maybe slightly shorter than he normally would, but he's ripped the ball and it's spun violently, viciously, like it hit a pebble. But it's also bounced, and it's ended up almost going past Bosch's throat, except absolutely nowhere near his actual body because of the amount of spin that it's got. It would be silly to say that he played and missed this ball because he wasn't actually in the same time zone as the delivery when it was finally taken by Rishabh Pant. That's how much this ball just deviated from normal. And for Rishabh Pant, he has to become actual Spider-Man to be able to get this ball, and he ends up in the dirt at the end, and everyone is giggling. This is a ridiculous delivery to happen at the end of day 2 of a test match. But of course, I'm telling you this story for a couple of reasons. It is a little bit of a metaphor because of what this wicket actually ended up doing. India found themselves in the dirt at the end.
The Good Areas conversation never ends over on our live channel. Head over and watch it all there.
There are going to be a lot of cricket fans who are going to be talking about India and chasers at the moment. And here's the graphic, if you need it, of all the 4th innings losses since 2018. Of course, there's a bunch of lower chasers here that they didn't do particularly well in, but let's remember that was a very long time ago and almost in a galaxy far, far away when you look at the modern India side. In the middle period, there's a lot of very big chasers, which even though teams have got a lot better at handling, these are still the sorts of games that you expect your sides to lose. But perhaps most interesting to us is the last 4 chasers that they've actually lost in. There was the Wankhede one in a series that a lot of Indian fans just don't want to remember at all. There was of course the one at Lords, which was very, very tough as well. And then this one at Eden Gardens. Lords was an incredibly tough pitch, specifically tough to score runs on, not always tough to stay in on. And even then, if the crease had not been marked the way it was, perhaps Mohammad Siraj's ball would not have rolled back onto the stumps. The Eden Gardens wicket made the Lords one look friendly. This was a tough chase. And so yes, 93 when chasing just 120 odd doesn't seem very good. But I think if you're focusing on the chases in this game, you've probably missed the wider point here. Let's start with exactly how the wickets fell in this game. You can see that in the first innings, there was 7 wickets that went to pace. In the second innings, there was 4. Then it was 3, then it was 2. That's a fairly normal pattern in some ways, that it gets worse for taking wickets for pace bowling as the game goes on. But it's the violence of which it does it in this game. 7 wickets in the first innings is quite full on. And even 4 wickets in the second innings means that at that point, more than half the wickets were taken by seam bowlers. That is not what you would expect on a normal wicket in India, right? This was abnormal in every way. But it's also worth noting that this wicket was still helping the spinners all the way through as well. It might have helped them more towards the end than it did at the start, but this was not a wicket that was just for pace. It was not a wicket that was just for spin. It was for both kinds of bowling. That makes it much more of an anomaly. This wasn't like an Asian wicket, and it wasn't like a centre wicket. It was like a weird hybrid of both. But we knew coming in that Eden Gardens was quite friendly when it came to fast bowling. There's no one that was surprised that the quicks did well. But when you go into the numbers, you really understand what seam bowling can do on this Eden Gardens wicket. For instance, on the first day, seam bowlers averaged less than 16 in test matches over the last decade or so. I mean, that is absolutely extraordinarily cheap, low, dangerous. And when you factor in Jasprit Bumrah was going to bowl on day 1, it wasn't about to get any easier for anyone. So in your head, you'll say to yourself, well, it makes sense. Eden Gardens helps seam bowling a little bit more. I can understand that and everything else. But there's a difference between that and averaging fewer than 16 to quicks on day 1 of a test match. And if you look at the rest of India here, you will see that the average on day 1 against seam bowling is generally more than 40. Under 16 in Eden Gardens, more than 40 in the rest of India. This is a completely different surface. And if you look at the first class numbers, it gets even more wild. These are all the grounds that have had more than 30 matches since the start of 2005. Dharamshala has 3/4 of their wickets go to pace. But that makes sense. There's bounce in them hills. It's basically in the Himalayas. There's greenness everywhere. That makes a lot of sense. Eden Gardens is not that far behind at 71% of their wickets going to pace. So this actual test match where the spinners dominated as well as the quicks wasn't like their first class wickets. Their first class wickets are almost exclusively just for the quick men. So if you already have a pitch that is so good for quick bowling and then you add conditions that allow spin and bounce and chaos, I mean, how are you supposed to make runs? And if you think about this particular game, no one made runs. There were periods in which they stayed in. In fact, it's a fascinating game because if you look at the scores, it looks like a 2-day test match. But it does go a decent amount into the third day. And that is because there were 3 batters who actually managed to stay in. Temba Bavuma will get all the plaudits for his innings, and quite rightly so. But KL Rahul also played a really important innings in the first knock, and Washington Sundar did it twice. Both times he batted, he took out a huge percentage of the deliveries and kept some sort of consistency at least at one end. So 3 batters in this game basically took what probably should have been a 2-day game and made it a 3-day game. But what none of those guys could actually do was score runs. Even when they stayed in, there were not a lot of runs to come. So not only was this a wicket that helped pace and spin, it didn't help stroke play. So think about this from a batting perspective. And obviously on this channel, we try and think of things from a bowling perspective, but just pretend that you're a batter in this game for a moment. You have a situation here where the seam bowlers are on top, the spin bowlers are on top, and you can't score boundaries. That's basically a triple whammy. And on top of all that, it was the overlap of all these things. It wasn't particularly easy to hit a boundary pretty much the entire way through this game, right? But also, when it was good for pace bowling, it was still good for spin. And when it was really good for spin, there was still a little bit there for the quicks. There was no respite if you were a batter. But the spin bowling is where we really want to focus here, because this is where things get a little bit nuts. This is the median degrees of turn for each innings in this game. And there's a couple of patterns I want to talk about. The first is that even when the quicks were massively on top to start this game, the median turn was still 2.86 degrees. That's not unplayable, but that's tough. That's consistently tough if you're going up against that. By the second innings, that had gone to 3.43. We're still not quite an unplayable, but now we're at really tough. You factor in the odd weird bounce as well, and 3.43 is very tough. So India's second innings actually did quite well when you factor this in. But in the third innings, it's 2.78, before the final innings going back up to 3.46. So the first pattern to notice here is that it was consistent spin all the way through, even when the quicks were doing well. But the second pattern is more interesting. And that is the fact that when India had the ball, it spun at less than 3 degrees. And when South Africa were bowling, it spun at nearly 3.5. That is a massive difference between these two bowling attacks. But we also wanted to look at the balls that really ragged. So you can see in the first innings, it was consistent spin, but there was only 8% of the deliveries that really ragged, right? You go to the second innings, and suddenly it's up to 23%. That's a lot of deliveries that are spinning more than 5 degrees, and more than 5 degrees is basically unplayable. In the second innings, it was 15%. In the third innings, that goes down to 15%, which again, doesn't make any sense. And then in the final innings, over a quarter of the deliveries were what we would call mathematically unplayable deliveries, where it is spinning more than 5 degrees. And there were also other inconsistencies in the surface. It was by far the toughest to play. But that same pattern we were talking about still exists. India do not get as many unplayable deliveries as South Africa are. And my first thought with this was, maybe Jadeja's just got a little bit older, right? And he's changed who he is as a player, and maybe he can't get those balls to rag. But then I remembered the story I told at the top, which was about a ball that I saw him bowl, in which it ragged and leapt off a mini trampoline. So it's not Jadeja. Then what on earth is going on here? And so you have a look. Harma spun the ball massively all the way through the game. Maharaj spun the ball massively all the way through the game. And Jadeja spun the ball massively all the way through the game. And even Markram with his part-time got lots of turn. The 3 guys who didn't turn it was the wrist spinner, which is weird, and then the other 2 finger spinners. This is not the first time in the last, year to 18 months that we've started to see that other spinners are just turning the ball more than India. There's something about the way that the Indian spinners are bowling that is not quite the same as what the overseas spinners are doing. And for a long period of time, that was a plus in India. And now it seems like a bit of a minus. You look at this spin bowling attack, and you've got Jadeja, Kuldeep, Akshar, and Washington. And yet, Simon Harmer has basically outbowled a good percentage of those guys. Simon Harmer's a very good bowler, but he's not even their best spinner. And so again, in a home test match, India has turned a secondary tweaker into Ravi Ashwin. We've seen this with Hartley and Kuhneman, not to mention Ajaz Patel and Mitch Santner. But when these wickets are really ragging, and you do not have Ashwin and Jadeja at their absolute peak, suddenly you can get beaten by kind of any spinner who's having a good game. And Simon Harmer had a magnificent game. But there's one more thing I want to talk about the spin, which I find really fascinating here. There was a period of time at which our chat was talking about that South Africa just kept sending out right-handers to bat, while the two bowlers were Ravi Jadeja and Akshar Patel. Both of these guys are left-arm finger spinners and obviously prefer to bowl to right-handers. You can see here they both average under 20 to right-handers, and while their averages are not terrible against left-handers, there's a bit of a bump. But you may look at this and go, well, look, these guys are really experienced cricketers. They played a lot in Asia, and over a period of time, they also do well against left-handers, even if they prefer right-handers. Surely South Africa would be better just to pick their best players. And maybe you could make that argument, and I don't think I would have anything to say against it. But what about Simon Harmer? We don't have a lot of data on him in Test cricket, but we do know that against right-handers, he averages about 30. And against left-handers, he averages 18. Go back through this Test match for a moment. In the first innings, Simon Harmer took 4 wickets. 3 of them were left-handers. In the second innings, Simon Harmer took 4 wickets. Yes, 3 of them were left-handers. And something else happened in the fourth innings because Aiden Markram also bowled, and he is another off-spinner who likes left-handers, and he took another one. So that 3 actually went back to 4. India lost 7 wickets in this match to right-arm off-spin, spinning the ball away from them. That is quite a percentage. Those are the sorts of numbers that our Ashwin used to do. And so you look at this game and you do think to yourself, what a curious collection of random things just happened. You had a pitch that was great for seam bowling in India, and it was also great for spinners. You had the Indian spinners being literally outturned by the South Africans. You had the inability for anyone to make runs. And then in the end, you had a chase of 124 that was safely defended. This was a spasmodic, miraculous, magnificent, chaotic match, all things considered. And a lot of people will be looking at the chase. But the entire game was absolutely nuts. It is actually really hard to pick apart this as an analyst and try and work out what happened. But there's one thing that I'm absolutely certain of. Like at the end of day 2 with Rishabh Pant, India ended up in the dust. Are you as chronically online as Moses Enriquez? Then here's another video for you. Or if you also like books and stuff, you can buy my new one on the art of batting. If you loved this video, hit the bell icon to be notified for more.